Hey Spanish Fork, welcome to our second weekly update of the Spanish Fork River. I'm Nick Porter, Public Information Officer, joined again by City Manager Seth Parents. And today we're happy to have Lieutenant Corey Slaymaker with Spanish Fork Police Department with us today. Thanks for coming, gentlemen.
We are excited to be here, aren't we, Corey?
Absolutely.
So let's first talk about what happened Tuesday night, because many of us saw you on the news yesterday, Corey, but what happened Tuesday night?
So Tuesday night, our Spanish Fork Police actually came through the Sheriff's Office, a call of 4 individuals that were putting kayaks into the Spanish Fork River up near Canyon View Park in that area. And concerned citizens called in, didn't think that was a great idea, didn't think it was safe. They called in, but the kids ended up getting into the river, began to kayak down. As law enforcement arrived, they were looking for the individuals. They located one who advised that a couple of the kayaks had flipped over, but the individual thought that they had got out of the water. So there was still some unknown as if the individuals were or were not out of the water. Multiple sheriff's deputies, police department, fire EMS responded and began looking through several miles of the river because it's running high and fast, and they were eventually able to locate all 4 individuals. They were safe, they were able to get out of the water, but 2 of them did flip over and their kayaks went down a little bit further. They were able to get the kayaks out later, but just a very scary situation that can be prevented for sure.
So what did the call come out as? Is it just, hey, there's some kids that are getting in the river, or there are kids in the river, or how did the dispatch call come out to you?
It come out as basically 4 teenage individuals that were putting kayaks into the river that were going to kayak down the Spanish Fork River, and the citizens were concerned about that.
Corey, we've been asking, inviting, and even requesting residents and people around the river to stay out, and this is maybe a worst nightmare scenario for you as responders to get a call that there may be some individuals. As I reviewed some of the details about the call, I think originally I had understood 5 individuals were in the water, and I bring that up to say these kinds of circumstances become really confusing, very chaotic, and you guys begin looking for and chasing everything and anything, because if somebody is missing, say there were 5 and you only had 4, you're going to keep looking for that 5th until you can finally determine that there were only 4. But what does this do to you guys? As you go out, you respond to a call, some of the language in a call like this might include, or I think even did include, that this was a possible recovery. What does that mean for you and in your world, and what does that do to you as a first responder emotionally and maybe even physiologically?
So for everybody involved, it brings a lot of anxiety. You know, we know as first responders that the river is running high, it's running fast, and to put, when you have individuals that are in the river, and we know they're in the river, and we're getting additional information as it's coming in, and we hear that a couple of them have flipped over, we don't know where these individuals are at. Are they still in the river? Do we need to get search and rescue? Do we have the proper equipment? So, and then, you're not talking about a specific location, you're talking about
8 miles
of the river, because it's going so fast they can travel. There's a lot of debris in the river that can cause, harm and problems.
It's nighttime.
It's beginning to be nighttime, yes.
The water's brown, you can't see through it.
It's cold.
Yeah, it's cold.
So there's a lot of elements that go into this. It brings a lot of anxiety and stress to first responders because we want to make sure that everybody's safe, and we don't want it to be a recovery. We don't want somebody to die because of an accident, and so that's why we're here today, to let everybody be aware of the safety. Please stay away from the river, let it come down, and it's enticing. I mean, there's people that get really enticed by the fast-moving water, but it's just not safe, and we want to make sure that everybody stays away, because we, as first responders, we don't want to put ourselves in jeopardy because of something that someone did that could have been avoided.
You know, these individuals probably experienced, chances are maybe they have kayaked the river before. Certainly lots of people have done that. But as you go into a river like this, the river doesn't behave like you've ever experienced it before. And so how you operated your kayak before isn't good enough today. And so the kayak that I get at Walmart, you know, that I'm going to use on the river in the summertime when it's flowing at 90 or 100 CFS, that's totally adequate, you know, and the river's only a foot deep or 2 feet deep. But that kayak's not sufficient for this. And you know, am I wearing a life jacket? Am I wearing a helmet? Am I wearing a wetsuit? Because in this water was ice yesterday, right? This was frozen snow 12 hours ago. So guess how cold it is? It's 34 degrees.
Exactly.
And I don't have a lot of time until, you know, hypothermia starts to set in. And so all of these things add up to the simple message, right? Stay out of the river.
As fun as it may look, it is very dangerous. The risk is very high, and as first responders, like I say, we just are please asking individuals for the time being to please stay out of the water.
And as we talked about what our update this weekend was going to be, you know, we do have a little bit of a snowpack update. We'll talk about why the river is going to get back up to where we saw it last week. But really the most important message today is stay out of the river. And it's not a safe place to be. It's extremely dangerous, and we don't want you in there because this looked innocent and fun, and these kids I don't even think knew the risk they were taking, but also the response they were going to get from the community looking out for them and from law enforcement that came to be there and potentially rescue what could have happened.
Yeah, if you get in the river, it's not going to go how you planned. It's just not. And then there are going to be resources that get deployed, and now we're spending a lot of effort to come after you. Worse, I'm now putting you in danger, right? I'm putting whoever's search and rescue, swift water rescue. We paged out a helicopter. They didn't actually take off, I know, but there was a helicopter that was going, a night operation for a helicopter, right? All of those things add up to. There's lots happening, and that can be avoided if you just stay out of the water.
Yeah, it's not a harmless deal right now. It's a serious response and something that we take seriously because there's been tragedies just this year, this month, in the Provo River, in the Weber River, and we really want to avoid something happening in the Spanish Fork River.
Absolutely, and just on top of that, as law enforcement side of it, we're doing extra patrols up and down the river in an effort to make sure that, you know, there's a lot of kids that walk the river. There's some that are close to schools. And we just want to make sure that, you know, as curiosity sets in, that we don't have individuals that are getting close to the river. We want to make sure everybody's safe, and that's our goal, and we're going to continue doing that as long as the river runs high.
And we all saw a couple last week, 10 days ago, the river reached, you know, the height of the season, as it were. Just about 2,000 CFS, or cubic feet per second, which is how we measure the flow and the amount of water that's in there. And we've since come down, but we're about to head back up to that same spot. So let's touch on that briefly. We have the graph of the snowpack that's up in the Colorado Basin, which is what feeds the Spanish Fork River. So Seth, walk us through what the snowpack is and why we believe that the river's going to rise again this week.
So this is a graph we've seen in this setting before, and one we've used. I think this is available on the city's website. This graph shows that we've come down significantly, right, from 32 water inches to an average of 13. There are a couple of elements to this. So we want to show this right now. We are about down to what is a typical average year, and right now, in an average year, you would start to see the melt happen from this amount of water. But the river would be at 100 or 150 cubic feet per second water flow. It's at 1,300 cubic feet per second. So what still has to come down will add on top of what is already flowing in the river. But I want to look at a couple of other graphs that are actually kind of well, let's dive into some of the specific sites that make up that graph. That's actually a combination of data. So we have what are called the Clear Creek 1 and Clear Creek 2 sites. And if we can pull up, let's pull up the low elevation, what is called the Clear Creek 2 site.
Okay, you got it.
This Clear Creek 2 site is tells a great story. First of all, there was a lot of low level, 7,600 feet, right? So up there in the mountains, but a lot of low level snow, roughly 28 inches of water up there in the mountains. It's usually about 10 to 12 inches of snow per inch of water. So, 27 inches of water, that multiply that by 12. That'll tell you how many feet were up there. At least as it fell, it might have compacted. But if you focus at the bottom of that graph, that's where we are in terms of the low elevation snow. That's great news. This low level snow is what melts off first. The higher, the 60s and 70s down here in the valley will start to melt that snow, as you can see. And let's look, maybe if you'll highlight somewhere around that second really deep trend down. Yep, right there. That happened, around April 25th. And if we remember, that's when we started to sound the call for sandbag help. And the temperatures in the mid 70s to low 80s brought down all of what you see there. Then we had a little bit of slowdown the last week or so. You can see how the angle of that line changed about May 5th-ish. And then it's steep again. We'll bleed off, shouldn't say bleed off, we'll melt off all of this snow this weekend, right? This will be at zero by the end of this weekend, which is great. Let's jump to the next graph. That is the Clear Creek 1, or about 9,000 feet. By looking at this, you can still see we have roughly 23 water inches of snow up in the high elevations. That's okay. This water needs to come down. It still needs to come down. But because the low elevation has melted off, that was all of the water that we've seen so far. This now needs to come off. It needs warmer temperatures for it to really come down. And so the 70s, mid 70s that we see in the 10-day forecast and the 80s will really start to bring this down. Thankfully, this won't come down on top of that mid-level snow. So we expect to see this snow hit the river next week as we get into the high 70s and low 80s. And all indications are that we'll get back to at least the 2,000 cubic feet per second range sometime mid to late next week. And probably stay up there for 3 or 4 days. And then it might be that we start to see it go down maybe for what could be the last time. But because there's still 23 water inches up there, we know that we still have another 3, 4, maybe even 5 weeks of high water flow as that high elevation snow starts to come down. I feel like a meteorologist talking here.
Yeah. Well, hey,
you're doing a great job.
You have learned a lot.
And maybe a hydrologist
during this project or during this process. So this is the forecast that the state hydrologist, who's a real hydrologist, provides us.
For sure. Yep.
And based on temperatures and that snowpack that we just went over, their projection is the high coming back next week on Wednesday, just under 2,000. Now again, just like any forecast, it's not perfect and it will be refined as we get closer.
Yep.
But that's what we can expect, right? Is an increase back up to where we've been.
Absolutely. And just like the weather, you can really count on tomorrow's forecast. And whether it's going to be exactly right or plus or minus a few degrees, it's going to be close. You get out 4 or 5 days, it gets a little less accurate, right? And then 10 days, you're just kind of basing it off historical models. So we use this, we look at this, and in many ways we rely on it. But we really know and focus in on the next couple of days because we know that 5 days out for sure, we're going to see it get tweaked and go up and down. So as the models play out, we expect to see a peak sometime between Wednesday and Friday. And just how much comes off in the early part of the week will tell us how much will remain to come off when we really get into the 80s, which I think you're going to see on that 10-day forecast, right? Right now, so this is the 10-day forecast today. And by the middle of next week through the weekend, those 80s will bring down a lot of that high elevation snow. And what I've learned is if the 10-day forecast says 81, 82 today, chances of it getting to 85, 86 in the actual 10 days, are pretty good. So we expect a lot of melt to happen mid to late next week.
So we're going to leave the sandbag walls there. We may need them this next week. We've continued to remove debris out of the river and take a lot of other, all the mitigation work we've done to this point that we think will help us get through this next round of high temperatures and high water. So I think that's all. For anything else for this update?
We didn't have a lot of questions come in, and so hopefully this has answered maybe some of the questions people haven't asked. But I think we ought to encourage residents, if they do have questions, put them in the comments of the various social media platforms this shows up on. And if you have other questions we haven't answered, submit those as well. We'll try to answer them next week.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can always text us on our website or just text 801-804-4500. You can send us a message on social media. We'll be responsive to those and comment on these videos. We want to be as helpful as we can in answering questions. We also have great resources on our website, SpanishFork.org/flood. Thank you, Corey, Seth, for spending some time with us today. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate the time you spend in being educated about the river, and we'll bring you an update next week. Until then, please stay out of the river, keep your children and pets away from the edge, and avoid all river recreation so you can be here with us next week for our update. We'll see you then.